Welcome 32 it, everybody. This is the second episode of Beyond the Tape. I'm your host, TJ Wengert, and today we're going to go through my latest two-round 2025 NFL mock draft. I'm so excited to run through this. First one that is going to be up here on the 32 Beat Writers site, so welcome to any new viewers, anybody who doesn't know what 32 Beat Writers is. This is your one-stop home for fantasy football news, off-season movement, and now we're going to expand into the NFL draft and covering that more. So we got you covered for everything you need to know in season, off season. 32 Beat Writers, again, has you covered. Really excited to run through this mock draft. Leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to reach out to me on X if you have any questions or players you think may be a better fit for your favorite team. Always like hearing from different fans and fan bases about who they're kind of keying in on as a potential fit. You guys certainly know your team as well as anybody out there. So feel free to message me on X, leave some comments, and if you're also watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. We're trying to get the YouTube channel up and going even more so throughout this upcoming offseason. So with all that down, I think we've covered our bases. Let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with the New York Giants picking number 1 overall. No surprise here. It's Cam Ward. He's my QB1. We talked about it a little bit last week with Zach. I like the arm talent that's naturally there. I think he's a functional athlete, can throw from multiple arm angles, and we'll see what happens with the Giants this offseason. You know, I felt like Brian Daboll earned another year, or should be given another year, but the more you watch the Giants this year, it almost feels like that team may be giving up on him. So I am interested to see what John Mara decides to do in regards to Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll. If those two are both there, I do think, it's kind of fair to them. Extend the opportunity to draft a quarterback. Daboll gets a guy that has a lot of tools, a lot of upside there in Cam Ward. So I'd be really interested to see the fit there. Plus, he'd be stepping into an environment with an NFL wide receiver 1 type of guy in Malik Neighbors, and we would actually add even to that once we get to the second round. So Cam Ward to the Giants, that's how we kick things off in this mock draft. Then at number 2, the Patriots, they already have quarterback established, so no real surprise here. We're going to make the pick, Travis Hunter. Just a guy that can make an immediate impact for this team. I would say you go ahead and roll him out day 1 as your corner 2 opposite of Christian Gonzalez. That tandem in and of itself excites me. And then, this is a team that needs a guy who can be just a guaranteed winner, especially in those gotta-have-it third down situations. In the red zone, they're looking for a difference maker. I'm hoping Javon Baker, Jalen Polk, those guys get better in year 2. But when push comes to shove and it's time to get that big play on one of those money downs, Travis Hunter, 15 to 20 snaps on offense, I think could be that catalyst that kind of helps get this offense up over its current obstacles that it's facing. So that, and then we'll see what happens with the offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt. Something else to keep your eye on there for sure. But if you're not looking for a quarterback, I definitely think Travis Hunter should be the first non-QB off the board. Then that takes us to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm going to have Mason Graham be the pick here. It's been mostly edge play for Eric Armstead. Trayvon Walker's got some flexibility, but again, mostly an edge player. Josh Hines-Allen, he got the extension, again, an edge player. So feels like they're pretty well solidified there on the outside, parts of the defensive line. But you look at that interior, and it definitely feels like a unit that can and should be better. We'll see what they decide to do with Eric Armstead. It sounds like he's the reason that he's playing mostly on the outside. He wants to play edge rusher more. To me, I think he's best utilized using it at both spots, inside and out. But, whatever they decide to do with Eric Armstead, putting that aside, Mason Graham gives you a day 1 impact at the 3-tech position, high-level run defender with plenty of quicks at the line of scrimmage, NFL-ready hand usage and repertoire of moves, so he can make an impact day 1 as a pass rusher as well. So this is one of the higher floor, safer prospects in this year's class, and it comes at a spot where I think the Jags certainly could use an upgrade. Next, the Tennessee Titans. Let's give them Tetairoa McMillan, my wide receiver 1. There's a lot of wide receivers I like in this year's class. Not quite as good as the years past in the wide receiver spot, but there's still a lot of players to like. And, like I said earlier, 32 Beat Writers got you covered for fantasy football. And I do think there's some guys here that can make for really interesting fantasy football fits once we get down that line. So it's going to be really fun to watch the conversation shift from draft season into fantasy football season and how these fits make a world of difference. And this would be a fun one. Obviously, things to figure out at quarterback here. You could go Shadir Sanders. There's something telling me that they're going to be in the veteran market. Something tells me that, Brian Callahan, he swallowed enough pills with the Will Levis of it all this year and a lot of head-scratching decisions. I almost think they're kind of first in line maybe for Sam Darnold, other than the Minnesota Vikings, of course. And if not, Sam Darnold, maybe it's Kirk Cousins now that he's going to be cut loose this free agency. A lot of things to figure out there at quarterback in Tennessee. Let's say they go the veteran route. That leaves wide receiver as another big need on this roster. I think Tetairoa McMillan with his size, catch radius, yards after the catch ability on top of that, serves as a really nice complement there with Calvin Ridley as the field stretcher and as the number 2, where ultimately I think he is kind of more of a 1B to a high-end wide receiver too. So I think this ultimately kind of makes the pecking order fall into the right places there in Tennessee. Again, with the caveat, this definitely could be Shadir Sanders, but something's telling me they're going to go the veteran route this offseason. Takes us to Cleveland Browns. This could be another Shadir Sanders type of team, but ultimately, like, you got to get the foundation set. And this has been a team that has, the defensive line is still great. Myles Garrett's an animal, but when you think of Cleveland football, you think about their trench play, right? I think their offensive line has taken a pretty substantial step back this year, and that in turn, I mean, not that that was going to turn the year around for Deshaun Watson. He was a problem in and of himself. But, you know, and Jameis Winston comes with a lot of erratic play. And DTR is not exactly a world beater either, but you can't help but think, man, what would those guys have been with a better, more stable, you know, what we think of the Cleveland Browns offensive line being, how would that have affected those guys? So let's go ahead and lay the foundation. Let's eat our vegetables. Let's take Kelvin Banks Jr. here, solidify that left tackle spot. Will Campbell, him, both kind of, you know, 1A, 1B best offensive linemen in this class. Campbell, probably the more likely of the two to shift inside to guard. I do know there's some people saying that about Banks. So, you know, a lot to be figured out there. We'll see what the measurements are once we get to the combine, but I like this as an easy Jedrick Wills replacement here. Plug in Kelvin Banks at that left tackle spot, and then, you know, we'll see what happens at the quarterback position, what they ultimately decide to do. I do think ownership's going to have a say in that as well, right? Like, the ownership clearly didn't want to see Deshaun Watson benched because of all the money they're paying him. And guess what? Next year, they're still going to be having to pay him a lot of money. So I almost wonder if ownership steps in again and says, hey, no, we're paying him. We're playing Deshaun Watson. So again, lots to be figured out there, and I do apologize in advance for Browns fans. I know you're looking for a quarterback here. But speaking of quarterbacks, Shadir Sanders to the Vegas Raiders. In the next mock or so, we might start adding in trades to this video. I do think the win this last week for the Raiders may have cost them draft capital, because I do think they want Shadir Sanders, but they may just have to climb up the board to go make that happen. We'll see. It takes two to tango. It's going to take a team at the top of the board wanting to move down. It's going to take the right price point for that trade to go through. But let's just say this plays out the way it does. Titans, Browns, they're looking to go elsewhere with quarterback, or not really jumping at this quarterback class to be the year they want to draft one. That ultimately allows the Raiders to get their guy. And it will be interesting to see what happens at the OC spot. Do they keep the Turners there running things? Is Antonio Pierce, how hot's that seat? The win last week certainly helps his case, which, you know, ironically, it hurts their draft position, helps Antonio Pierce. So, you know, a lot of things still to be figured out the rest of this NFL season, the offseason, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think QB is like priority number one for this team. They've been kind of the team without a chair when the musical chairs kind of comes to a close. The music stops. The Raiders are the ones without a chair to sit down into. I think this is the offseason they'll prioritize making sure that they do get that quarterback. And I do think Shadir Sanders would be a really interesting fit depending on what the OC situation plays out to be. They also need to add some more weapons, can get better at running back, can get better at receiver. The offensive line certainly has some spots where they can get better as well. So it's not a picture-perfect situation, but quarterback is the place to start for the Vegas Raiders. Let's get on to the Chicago Bears, obviously coming off a disappointing game to say the least on Thursday Night Football. Let's go get him another one of these top offensive linemen in the class, Will Campbell. Yes, maybe he does shift inside to guard, but hey, if you're a Bears fan, you're looking for an upgrade at pretty much 5 different spots right now, especially now with, you know, Braxton Jones out for the rest of the season. Like, you know, there's not really a spot on that offensive line that can't be upgraded upon. So whether it's left tackle, left guard, Will Campbell, this is a plug and play upgrade for a team that has just got to get better in the trenches. And that is going to be our MO the rest of this mock draft for Chicago as well. I think they got a lot of other things right on the roster. They have to nail the head coaching hire. They've also got to revamp the trenches. All right, Carolina Panthers here up next. They're going to go Abdul Carter. I do think, you know, hey, Jadeveon Clowney, solid player. DJ Wonnum's had some nice weeks, but they're looking for a different center, a difference maker, really. They're looking for a cornerstone piece, specific on that defensive line at the edge spot. I think Abdul Carter could be that piece. Hopefully then you add in Derek Brown coming back from injury next year. And we're going to add one more piece to that D-line a little bit later on in this mock draft. So if we can retool that defensive line, I think there's pieces elsewhere on that defense. I would assume they bring back Ejiro Evero to be the defensive coordinator once again. So I think a lot of pieces are there. I think they just, you know, a little bit more top-end talent, a few more difference makers there on the defensive line. It starts with Abdul Carter. Then this defense could take another step forward. And then hopefully, you know, you go into year 3, Bryce Young continues to take steps forward. Could add another receiver into the mix to replace Adam Thielen. Offensive line, a couple tweaks could be made there. But hopefully we're making progress going into year 2 in that Dave Canales era. All right, to the New York Jets here at 9. Maybe a little bit of a surprising pick here, but I'm going to go Will Johnson. DJ Reed going into free agency, so we'll see. I'm not normally a huge fan of paying corners once they get into their late 20s, just because it feels like you're buying at the top of the market, and it may bottom out sooner rather than later. So let's go Will Johnson, get cheaper, get younger at that position. I also think him plus Sauce Gardner, what an awesome 1-2 punch there on the outside. They also have some work they can do on the defensive interior. I don't hate that, but no Mason Graham here. Not in a rush to draft any of the other guys at the IDL spot in the top 10. Maybe you go edge here, but I also think, you've already sunk some assets into that. Let's develop those guys. Let's go get Will Johnson to replace DJ Reed. And part of this is tough too with the Jets because, what's going on with Rodgers? Granted, first 2 quarterbacks off the board. I'm not taking any other QB in the rest of the first round. But also, if Rodgers is gone, Devontae Adams could be gone. So could this be a Luther Burden spot? That's something else to explore here too. But just still got to wait and see what's going on with Rodgers, DA, the rest of that around this Jets, saga, so to speak. All right, let's get on to the New Orleans Saints here at pick number 10. I'm going to go Jalen Walker. And he has kind of become this guy, the more I watch, the more I love the player. I know it says linebacker. Just play this guy at edge. Just play this guy at edge. It's funny, Micah Parsons comps are going to be out there for Abdul Carter, and there's going to be some there for Jalen Walker, this hybrid off-ball to edge. His snaps are pretty even between those 2 spots, but first step, get off, play strength above his weight, violent hands, and man, once you add some moves into this guy's game, like a couple of inside counters with how athletic this dude is, and he can beat you to the outside shoulder every rep pretty much with how explosive and fast he is. You got a real potential difference maker here, and I'm starting to see the potential there with Jalen Walker. He's all the way up to my edge too. Really like the upside there, and just the Saints have they poured assets into this defensive line, but Isaiah Foskey not working out. Peyton Turner hasn't worked out. It's kind of Carl Granderson and not much else on the defensive line. Brian Brzez's not a terrible player, but I do think the production outweighs the overall play this year for Brzez. So let's keep trying to put assets into that defensive line, see if we can get a true difference maker. I do think with time, Jalen Walker could be just that for New Orleans. All right, we're actually going to stay at the edge spot here with the San Francisco 49ers. Kind of like the Browns this year, you think of their offensive line and you think it's a dominant unit, but it hasn't really been that way this year. Same is true with the 49ers and the D-line. Yes, Bosa's missed some time. Yes, Javon Hargrave's out for the entire year. But that being said, a nice compliment opposite of Nick Bosa would go a long way to kind of evening out the distribution and overall talent on that D-line. Nick Gordon, 6'4", 285. You can play him all downs. He's solid against the run. He's more nimble than you would think for someone 285 pounds. Got a decent repertoire of moves, right? Like a nice inside spin move and an inside counter he's comfortable going to. Plus the natural ability to win with length and power. That is, there for someone you would assume can do that at 6'4", 285. So I think maybe a little bit more finesse in his game from his last year at Purdue than what he put on display here at A&M. So I wonder if that's just kind of a coaching component there. But nevertheless, I do think that is something that is in his bag and can be used. So really like this as a compliment opposite of Nick Bosa, trying to get a little bit more beef on that 49ers D-line, get it back to where we've kind of maybe even kind of gone to sleep. We just assume the 49ers D-line is going to be great. I think a little bit more assets there will help get it back to where we customly think the 49ers D-line at. Anyways, let's move on there. Miami Dolphins. I thought about Malachi Starks here. That's kind of your Javon Holland, potential replacement. But, we'll see what ultimately happens there in free agency. I'm going to go Benjamin Morrison here. Still like the player, still like the tape. A hip injury, though, is a little worrisome, so this does come with an asterisk on it. Need more information there. Hip fluidity is such an important part of playing corner, and if that's a bigger injury with some time and we find that out, he's definitely going to kind of fall down the board, and maybe this becomes Siobhan Ravel instead. And a guy who's also injured, but not nearly as worried about that injury as I potentially am with a hip injury here for Morrison. But if all checks out, all is good, and you're just looking at the player in the tape, yeah, definitely a guy who should be going somewhere here in the top 12, at least top half the first round. Maybe a little bit light, not the most physical corner, but the coverage skills are certainly there. Athleticism that will check out as well if he could test at the combine. That's still TBD, of course, as well. So, and this is a team that needs an outside corner, right? Like Jalen Ramsey at this point, probably best if he starts playing more on the inside. Even him, like his best days are probably behind him. Can't imagine, the next 2 years are the peak of Jalen Ramsey's play. That being said, so one more outside corner certainly go a long way to boosting up that secondary in Miami. All right, let's get on to the Indianapolis Colts. This is going to be one of the next 3 picks here are just like easy peasy. Not going to overthink it. I'm going to go Tyler Warren here. Also, don't hate Colston Loveland as the option for the Colts. I've done that a ton in past mocks, but at 6'6", 261 pounds, I'm starting to think Tyler Warren's probably the better inline option of those two. And if that's the case, I definitely think that's something that the Colts would prioritize at that tight end spot, trying to get a better inline blocker, make it that much easier for Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor to continue to eat in the ground game. Plus, it's just one more pass catcher that can be so versatile. He knows how to beat and sink into the soft spots against zone, but also with plenty of man coverage beating ability in his own right because of how athletic and also the frame, right, just boxing out defenders. All that is certainly in play there for Tyler Warren. So a big body target for Anthony Richardson with, some accuracy concerns in his game. I think makes a lot of sense there to add that into that Colts offense. Next up, the Bengals here at 14. I'm going to go Malachi Starks. It feels, the more I watch the Bengals, the more I'm like, man, they miss Jesse Bates. And some of it's, Lou Anarumo needs to be better as a defensive coordinator. We'll see if he's even their DC going into next season. Probably not. And also, it's kind of become Trey Hendrickson and not a whole lot else on that defensive line. Corner's been banged up. Chidobe Awuzie, great when they first signed him. Since then, not as good. Same thing with Mike Hilton. So there's other diminishing, parts of that defense. But this is a team that, even if they were giving up a ton of points, Jesse Bates would come in with that, timely punched ball loose, and that's a forced fumble and an extra possession for the offense, or that timely interception. He was just there when you needed him most. And then in games where the defense was playing well, he could still do that, or he was a big part of why your defense was playing well and what he could do on the back end, limiting those big plays. And in retrospect, we see these, Cincy corners getting beat up now. How much of that could have been changed with, an over-the-top free safety playmaker like a Jesse Bates? So, want to add that type of potential and that type of presence into the back end of that defense with Malachi Starks. He could also play nickel. He could also play inside the box. It's strong safety, a lot of flexibility with Malachi Starks, but to me, we'll see what happens with the DC spot, but just play this guy over the top, take advantage of his range and athleticism, limit those big plays. Hopefully he's a turnover-creating machine. You can kind of recoup some of the loss from Jesse Bates when he left Cincinnati. And then this is the other pick that just don't overthink it. Ashton Jeanty, if he gets here to 15, makes a lot of sense. Also think Luther Burden makes a ton of sense. Matt Miller of ESPN was actually just tweeting about this morning. He'd be an awesome complement to CeeDee Lamb. We're going to go receiver in the second round for Dallas, but all in all, here in this mock, we're adding some more juice to this offense, no doubt about it. And I don't think Rico Dowdle's been bad. I just think Ashton Jeanty's got more to offer there. And plus, the pass catching upside is fantastic too, so he could almost just be your kind of pass downs guy, with Dowdle being everything else really for this offense. But I think GT comes with 3-down potential. Love the contact balance, love the long speed, the lateral burst in and out of his breaks, the one cut. It's all there for Ashton GT, one of the best running backs I've gotten as scout. So this one makes a lot of sense. He could certainly go even higher than this. I know I've had some Browns fans message me being like, why do you hate us? Please give us Ashton GT. That could be a lot of fun too. But again, got to draft him off since the line, get that unit back to where it was. But Ashton GT is going to be an interesting figure as we get deeper and deeper into this cycle, and just where is his range actually? But if he makes it to 15, I got a hard time thinking Jerry Jones is going to pass on that one. All right, on to pick number 16, the Arizona Cardinals. Let's give them Kenneth Grant. He officially declared yesterday as of when I'm recording this. But a guy who could play the one tech, be your true nose, or he could play the 3 tech. I also think there's enough kind of juice in that first step to where he could be used, at that 3 tech spot. High level run defender, no question about that game translating to the next level. The question is, how much more meat on the bone is there for him as a pass rusher? I could see where, hey, you're looking at the first step. Guys don't normally move like that at 339 pounds. We refine the hand usage there as a pass rusher. We might have a guy who's a true 3-down difference maker and a high-end player at that position. Certainly a potential, but also the floor is still relatively high because minimum, you're getting an awesome run defender and an athletic player that, he may run into a few sacks, and may ultimately, just with his athleticism, just become the ultimate kind of cleanup guy from the interior, which that in and of itself brings more value than I think people will understand, right? Because you have edge rushers coming in, the natural spot for a quarterback to step up to is, that stepping up into the pocket, and with his athleticism and his quick, he's going to probably take that away. So he's kind of an interesting figure in and of itself, just in his current state, but he definitely comes with some upside if you can figure out what his potential is as a pass rusher and if you can get him to his true ceiling there. But a very athletic player, awesome run defender, an abundance of play strength, and a guy that I just think, specifically the nose spot, just someone that the Cardinals don't have right now. All right, Tampa Bay here at 17. This is where I'm going to have Luther Burden III come off the board. Jalen McMillan might ultimately be their, Chris Godwin in the making. But I also think Luther Burden could be that, playing from the slot, using him as a yards after the catch tank, an absolute bully, but also long to be able to stretch the field too. So he's going to be an interesting player, and ultimately, maybe this should be Dallas taking him because again, the compliment to CeeDee Lamb is fantastic. But I also think Jalen McMillan, maybe that's your long-term replacement for Mike Evans, and Luther Burden then becomes your long-term replacement for Chris Godwin, who's going to be a free agent this offseason. So and that's where it gets tricky, right? Like, he drafted a guy in the top 100 last year. Do you need to stop there? How much longer can Mike Evans play? He's still super productive. So trying to weigh the timeline of how long you have these receivers being, at the peak of their powers, so to speak. But nevertheless, this has been a team that has kind of lived with awesome receiver talent the last few years. I don't think a trio of Burden, McMillan, and Mike Evans is going to upset Jason Light at all whatsoever. And I certainly don't think Baker Mayfield would be disappointed with it whatsoever. So I'm going to go Luther Burden here at 17. Probably one of the lower range of outcomes in regards to where his first round, pick range is probably at. All right, to the Seattle Seahawks here at 18. I'm going to go Josh Simmons. Yes, this would require him flipping over to the right side, but I think he's more than athletic, and I think he's a more than capable player of being able to do that. Not to mention, we're just seeing that become more and more of a thing that we just naturally see, right? It's just being trusted on these offensive linemen. And some of it, too, is like these teams get to meet with these players. They get to test this stuff out in private workouts, pro days, things like that. So we'll get a better idea of that, or teams will at least get a better idea of it. We'll see if I get a better idea of it. But I trust Josh Simmons. I think had he not gotten hurt, he might have been able to work his way into that OT1 conversation. I do see a lot of similarities with Paris Johnson, who, not to helmet scout here, another Ohio State tackle, but Paris Johnson, his first year in the league, was spent at right tackle. So I feel more than comfortable with asking Josh Simmons with an offseason before his rookie year, flip it over to the right side. And the other thing with that is, you don't have to rush him on the field. Seattle could start next year, and, fingers crossed, Abe Lucas is healthy, and maybe you can kind of ease Josh Simmons into the right tackle position, right? Like maybe you don't need him his rookie year. You'll just trust Abe Lucas. Hopefully he can actually stay healthy for a year. Or when Abe Lucas is hurt, maybe it's midway through the season, you've still built in more time for Josh Simmons to get comfortable flipping over to that side of the offensive line. So just trying to get that bookend tackle situation. You look at the best offenses in the NFL, or even just look at the Chargers this last year, laying that foundation, eating your vegetables, getting that tackle spot right when you can, kind of makes everything else fall into line, and you still have time to figure those other pieces out and develop players at those other spots. So that's kind of my thinking here with Josh Simmons. Yes, we're flipping over to right tackle, but if it works out, would be huge for this Seattle offensive line that has just been rough, to say the least, this season. All right, Atlanta Falcons here at 19. One of my draft crushes, Shamar Stewart, kind of a combo D-end edge player. Think about Darius Robinson last year. There's definitely some similarities there in just regards of how you can use this guy, right? Play him on the edge on early downs or in run downs, move him inside in passing situations. Simply put, though, 6'6", 290 with his arm length, that in and of itself, like I'm in. Like I'm interested to see what the potential and what we can get out of a guy with that type of a frame. And again, a guy you could play all four spots on that defensive line. You name it, you can line him up there. The questions are going to be, hey, overall, what's that first step? I'm really curious to see what his 20-yard short shuttle. That's typically a really good combine measure for, first step explosiveness. And then also, I think he'll dominate the Senior Bowl, but if he doesn't, like what are the question marks then coming out of that? Why not? But I think this is going to be a guy just like Darius Robinson at the Senior Bowl last year. The strength and the length are going to play in those one-on-one drills, and he's going to have a lot of eyes on him because of that. And yes, I know Atlanta drafted a few tweeners last year, Ruka Rowe, Brandon Dorless. Those guys are, IDL to me. Shamar Stewart is an edge rusher who can kick inside to play on the interior. Again, similar to Darius Robinson from last year. So that's kind of my thinking here. I don't hate James Pierce Jr. At whatsoever here. My only concern with that would be James Pierce Jr., let's just say he's 245 pounds. Let's just say that that's correct. And Arnold Ebiketie is your other edge rusher. You feel a little light there. You might get moved around in the run game. So I like Shamar Stewart and what he can do as a run defender and as a complement to Arnold Ebiketie, who's that smaller, lighter, win with quicks and finesse, that type of build of an edge rusher. Shamar Stewart, good athlete at 290, but just wins in a different way. All right, next up, Houston Texans, Emeka Egbuka. Stephon Diggs, that was a one-year mercenary type of addition. And then now, Tank Dell with another scary knee injury. We'll see what the prospects are for him moving forward in his career, but 2 knee injuries, plus, he was shot this last offseason. Unfortunate, because Tank Dell's one of my favorite players to watch, and I loved him in that draft, too, and he was a huge winner at the Senior Bowl, and I loved that moment for him. That being said, they might have to start thinking about, beyond Tank Dell and Nico Collins, what else we can add to this offense. I think Emeka Egbuka is just one of the easier projections when it comes to what he'll be at the next level. He can play inside, he can play out. I really like him as an inside player, though, I will say, specifically for what he could do as a blocker, right? Like, think about Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't think they're necessarily one-to-one playing type or body type, but just think about what he could do from the inside, and he is a willing blocker, and how that can help open up your offense, specifically running out of the shotgun. But even under center and even, various formations, it'll still work because you have that slot receiver who could potentially be a legit blocker for you. So I think Egbuka brings that to the table, plus just natural savvy as a route runner. He's quick in and out of his breaks, sure-handed, willing to work the middle of the field, can find the soft spots against. He just does the little things very, very well. Therefore, it makes it really easy to get this guy on the field because he's not going to let you down with those little things, the mistakes you just can't have, right? So I think this could be your potential Stephon Diggs replacement. Play him inside and out just like they were with Diggs. Use him in the red zone, right? Take advantage of what he could do as a blocker. This is, again, a guy that's just one of the easier rejections, so it's kind of hard to imagine him not going round one. Furthermore, top 20. All right, to the Los Angeles Chargers here at 21. I'm going to go with the upside play of Mykel Williams here. We'll see what ends up happening with the two edge rushers, Bosa and Mack. Things to be figured out there. Poona Ford also scheduled to be a free agent. The rest of their interior, I think you can just improve upon generally. So let's say one of those two edge rushers are gone. They keep Poona Ford, but then you look at the rest of that interior that needs an upgrade. Mykel Williams could be an interesting one-size-fits-all. Tuli Tuipulotu also does some inside work for this Chargers team, but preferably, I'd rather have Mykel Williams be the guy that you slot inside, and let's let Tuli Tuipulotu do his thing from the edge. So you have Tuipulotu plus one of the edge rushers currently on the roster. Let's just say it's Khalil Mack. And then you plug in Mykel Williams in that edge rotation, specifically on rundowns, where he is a fantastic run defender. But then also in passing situations, you can kick him inside and see what type of potential is there. I do think he's probably, I will say right now, I think he's a more polished product than Trayvon Walker. But I'm also someone who was like, I don't know why Trayvon Walker would go anywhere near number one overall. So putting that into context, I do think there is a little bit more in regards to his pass rush game than Trayvon Walker had, with also having great length, awesome power, and play strength. That makes him such a great run defender, and you see that on his tape already. So can you get more out of him as a pass rusher? That's the question mark. That being said, Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, those guys have done a great job developing the defense. You're starting to see career years out of guys that you didn't think would have career years on that defense, right? So can they work that same magic with Mykel Williams? Love to see them give it a try. All right, here at number 22, we're going to have another tight end go in the first round. It's going to be Colston Loveland from Michigan. 240, 245 pounds. So, question's going to be, can he play in line? I think there's some solid, there's some building blocks there for him as a blocker. I don't think it's out of the question. He does play in line. But I could also see, especially an older school coach like Sean Payton, I could see where you want to use him more as an H-back. So, and we'll also see what his official weight is at the Combine. That being said, it'll probably be a little skewed to the heavier side, right? The Combine's the one day that Bryce Young was over 200 pounds in his life. So, all that aside, I think it's just an interesting team to try to figure out what they're going to do at wide receiver, right? Like Marvin Mims is starting to make plays, and Troy Franklin's getting more involved, and Cortland Sutton's been a good player, but there's just like ongoing trade rumors around a Cortland Sutton, and we'll talk about that in the second round as well. But tight end is the one spot, like clear-cut, defined, they can get better at. And I just love the route running, the athleticism, the hands that Colston Loveland has. So I think surefire, you're getting an upgrade there from the receiving standpoint at tight end. The question will be, how do these coaches around the league view him as in regards to being a blocker? Can you trust him in line? That's going to be the question mark that we're still looking for an answer for. All right, let's get on to the Los Angeles Rams here at 23. This is a secondary that just has got to get some reinforcements. Siobhan Ravel, yes, a season-ending injury, but it was not an ECU schedule that was really, I think, going to change your mind about where he was going to go, unless he just had a string of really, really bad games and, he tanked his stock. I don't see that being something that was going to happen this year, but, anything's possible. We'll never know. But I trust the size, the athleticism, and the ball skills. All three of those check the box, kind of like Quinyon Mitchell from last year, but not quite to the same degree. I think Quinyon was definitely the better prospect. But still, checking those same boxes at a lower level of competition, but it looks like it's going to play the next level. And again, for the Rams, like, outside corner has just been horrendous. Can it get any worse? No. So, again, you're drafting a guy with ideal size, great athleticism, and awesome ball skills. With a nice defensive line in front of him, I think Siobhan Ravel would be able to be a day one, ready-to-go starter for this Rams secondary. Next up is the Washington Commanders. This round, I have James Pierce Jr. come off the board. A little bit lower than, I was just doing my rechecks for edge, and I think he should go somewhere higher than 24. He has definitely added probably 5 to 10 pounds to that frame. If you go back to 2023, he looks almost like a defensive back was just dropped on the D-line. He looks noticeably thin. I think he's added to that frame a little bit this year, but he's still light. And I think at the point of attack, he's not necessarily getting moved, but I don't think he's doing anything as a value add for the defense, right? Like, I don't think he's driving and tackles back or whatever, making any TFLs that are, changing a drive. It's just more so he's not getting blown off the ball and obliterated, and teams are just continuously running at him, which is, solid. But the question is, the next level, will teams do that, right? It's one thing at college, the next thing at the NFL level. So there's still going to be some concerns about his weights, his weight. Can he play on early downs? Can he stop the run? Yada, yada, yada. I think this year is definitely a step up in the right direction for James Pierce Jr. But I also think Washington has the infrastructure. They have guys who can play those early downs, like a Dorrance Armstrong, right? Like, just throw him out on those early downs. Let him, deal with the run game fodder. But then when it's 3rd and 12, or it's the fourth quarter and you're up by 10 and you need to put this game away, let this guy pin his ears back and do what he does best. He's probably got the best first step in this class, which is saying something in a class with Abdul Carter and Jalen Walker, who I think are right there with him. But it's going to be close between those three. And it's probably going to be a different answer depending on who you ask. But then also, I think he's got the best bend in this class. Natural hip flexion. And I just think that this guy on money downs, 3rd and longs, this guy could be the piece that I don't think Washington currently has on the D-line. Like, I don't think they have a pass rush winner right now. Double-digit sack, game-changing type of dude. And again, the snap count may not make James Pierce Jr. statistically that, but if you watch the games and see the impact he does have maybe on a limited snap count, you'll be able to say, okay, that's their finisher. That's their guy on a 3rd and long you got to account for. And again, I just don't think there's really anybody like that on this Washington D-line. Commanders fans, let me know what you think. Steelers, they're next up here at 25. Just overall, it's a bad secondary. Cam Sutton's not good. Dante Jackson's bad, but even worse than both those guys is James Pierre. Like, I sometimes forget that, like, oh yeah, we have a number 42 that plays in the secondary, James Pierre. Like, who let that guy on the field? They're just not good. They're just not good enough. And Joey Porter Jr. just plays a play style that comes with variance, right? Like, there's some weeks where he's not getting flagged, so he's shut down, and then there's other weeks where, yeah, they're going to call that holding every time he does it, and he's become quickly one of the most penalized players in the league, right? So there's some variance there with JPJ. Not a whole lot of variance in Jahdae Barron. Throughout his entire career, he's been a good safety. He was a really good nickel a year ago at Texas, and this year he's been a phenomenal outside corner. So I think a spot that, Pittsburgh's got Elliott on a 1-year contract. Sutton's, he was a 1-year thing, and, a questionable signing in and of itself. And then, Dante Jackson, soon to be free agent. There's a lot of potential openings there in that Pittsburgh secondary next year. And whichever one may be the open one, and once we get to the NFL draft, maybe they plug away at it in free agency. There's going to be a spot somewhere where Jahdae Barron fits into the picture, whether it's the starting nickel, whether it's playing some safety, whether it's playing outside corner. I think he can fit into the picture, and he's got great tape at all three of those spots. So easy kind of first-round guy for that, because he's an easy, kind of like a Emeka Egbuka. You do the little things right. You do so many things right. It's hard for me to not get you on the field, and I think Jahdae Barron kind of has that same quality, just on the other side of the ball. Baltimore Ravens are next up here at 26. I was between Ariante Ursary and Wyatt Milam here. I just to go Milam, just because I'm hearing a little bit more potential guard chatter with Milam. This is kind of one of two things, right? Like, this could be a Ronnie Stanley contingency. I also think Josh Jones could be potentially their left tackle of the future, depending on what happens with Stanley. And it was just a guy with a lot of injuries in his past, too. So a decision to be made there for Baltimore. And if that's the case, Josh Jones is potentially that left tackle of the future. I think Milam brings value as potential left guard of the future for this team. It's typically been more gap, but also you bring in Tyler Linderbaum, and they've introduced a little bit more zone, getting Linderbaum out into space, let him be the pulling guy for Lamar Jackson from time to time. So they've implemented a little bit more variety in that run game. So I'd be curious to see would they be willing to go even more of that, because I think Wyatt Milam's pretty comfortably guard or tackle. It's going to be a zone blocking scheme for him. So it's a little outside of what I normally think of when it comes to blocking in Baltimore, but I'd be willing to see if they want to do that, continue down this path, what they started with Linderbaum, add a more variety in that run game, or would they just want to go ahead and get a gap scheme guy, which in that case, Ariante Ursary is probably more the guy they would look at. And also, again, figure out what we're going to do with Ronnie Stanley. Are they going to bring back Josh Jones? What are they overall looking to do with that offensive line, specifically with that left tackle spot? So time will tell, but I do think Wyatt Milam could give them some multiple position flexibility there on that O-line. All right, Green Bay Packers are next up. I'm going to go Walter Nolan here, a guy that I am just continuously impressed with. The more I watch him this year, he's been a great run defender, but, at 305 pounds, he's probably more of a 3-tech, more than, like a Kenneth Grant who could play the 1 or the 3 at basically 340 pounds. This is probably a 3-tech, but with Jeff Hafley's defense, man, it's a lot of single high coverage, right? A lot of man, a lot of cover 3, and he wants his D-line, he wants the, edge rushers wide of the tackles, and he wants those guys, the interior guys, get upfield. He wants them utilizing quicks, splitting blocks, and like I said, just getting upfield. He wants quicks. And I think Devontae Wyatt could certainly kind of fit into that. I know this hasn't been like an earth-shattering year for his development. But also Kenny Clark getting up there in age. I do think with the athleticism Walter Nolan has, he could definitely be a Jeff Hafley. Like, this is my guy. Get upfield. You don't have to be the biggest in the run game. Just, you shoot gaps, split, double teams, things like that. Do it with quicks versus power. I do think Walter Nolan could be that type of edge rusher that Jeff Hafley's partial to. And I'd be curious to see what Packers fans feel about Devontae Wyatt. He's almost one of these guys that I forgot was a first rounder and was drafted by Green Bay in this run of first round, Georgia defenders. Them and the Eagles just, over the last couple of years, they've, I guess it's just really Devontae Wyatt with Green Bay. So ignore me, but he was an older prospect. They don't normally draft 24-year-olds. And I'd be curious from Packers fans, do you think that gamble worked out? Changing your draft strategy, did it work out? Or are you looking for an interior defensive lineman? Therefore, let me know your thoughts on Walter Nolan. Anyways, leaving that pick, and let's go to the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to go Cameron Williams here. This is a simple one anytime I do a mock, just because who's that potential right tackle of future? And it feels like Cameron Williams is almost always available when I do these mocks, right in this spot. 1-year starter at Texas. You see the potential, but you also see some of the, the rookie mistakes, so to speak, just because he is a first-year starter. You see some of the growing pains on display. He goes to Philadelphia and he gets to work with Jeff Stoutland, which in and of itself, a guy with these tools, these traits, working with Jeff Stoutland, sign me up. I'm on board. Plus the fact that you don't need him to start next year. Like, you would still have Lane Johnson in the building who would, as long as he's healthy, be the starting right tackle for this team. And then in the event of an injury, or you go into, year 2 of Cameron Williams' rookie deal, we'll see what happens with Lane Johnson. Is he going to retire? Is he going to keep playing? There always feels like there's a question mark there. Will he, won't he? And then you already have Cameron Williams waiting in the wings to take over. And it's very Howie Roseman, right? Like, we draft in the trenches. We always have that next guy up. So it definitely kind of fits their drafting MO. All right, to the Buffalo Bills. Some things to be figured out in regards to edge, right? Is Von Miller going to be back? What does his play look like the rest of the year? AJ Epinesa, will he, won't he be back next year? But I'm going to go Mike Green here. Specifically, I think get Epinesa back. I think him plus Rousseau, there's enough mass there to be the early down guys. Because Mike Green, one of the concerns you'll hear is, he's 248 pounds, maybe closer to 245, maybe a tick below that. He might be a little bit lighter for the next level against the run. But if they have Epinesa and Rousseau back, I feel comfortable, kind of like what we talked about with James Pierce Jr. earlier, letting Mike Green just be a mercenary on 3rd and longs or in games in which the Bills are up by double digits, which, that's happened once or twice this year, right? So I just think adding some more juice, specifically in the event they do move on from Von Miller. I think this is the offseason where that starts to become a possibility, and he is getting up there in age, and the play's been a little bit more variables from when he first got there. So like getting Mike Green in here in the first round, I think he's earned it. He's been one of the best players in college football at that edge spot, one of my favorite players to watch. Yes, against small schools, but he also kicked ass against Ohio State. So I think he's earned this as a potential first-round type of guy. I do think he's an interesting fit there in Buffalo. Next up, Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to go Trey Amos, a guy that a little bit late to the party on, but love the size, love the arm length, love the athleticism. This guy's got man coverage corner written all over it. That being said, even the most man-heavy team in the NFL is going to run zone at least half the time. So still some TBD to figure out how he's going to play in zone coverage and, where his comfort level is and just overall football IQ within that. But that being said, I love the man coverage instincts. Brian Flores, a guy who's kind of become more of a zone blitz guy, but I think, in his roots, he would like to get a little bit more man coverage mixed in there. I think Trey Amos is a step in the right direction for that. Plus, it's a Vikings team with, Byron Murphy Jr. set to become a free agent, Stephon Gilmore set to become a free agent, among other guys there in that secondary. So, going to need some more bodies in that mix, so it's kind of hard not to imagine them going somewhere in the secondary in the first round, first 2 rounds, first 3, top 100. There's going to be somewhere in the secondary the Vikings almost have to put an asset into just because the sheer turnover they might have at that position. All right, 2 more picks in the first round. Detroit Lions. Thought about a few different edge rushers here. Landon Jackson, certainly interesting. Princely Uman is a great pass rusher. Question marks about what he'll be as a run defender at the next level. Ashton Gelati is interesting. But I'm going to go Jack Sawyer here. Again, between him and JT Tuimoloau, I tend to lean towards Sawyer, but both coming off an awesome game last time out against Tennessee in the first round of the college football playoff. They're both kicking ass. I just ultimately think Sawyer comes with a little bit more juice and athleticism, and because of that, you can drop him into coverage more comfortably. You can also use him as a spy from time to time, like Ohio State has. And again, I just think that first step, you feel his impact a little bit more against an offensive lineman versus JTT, who comes with 10 more pounds of mass, but I also think that you kind of see that in regards to his get off. And there's just not a whole lot of bend there either. Not that Sawyer's like the most bendy guy, but I just think there's more natural athleticism there for Jack Sawyer. And I think it'd be kind of fun to get a Michigan and Ohio State guy opposite each other on the D-line. It's just kind of a natural, that's kind of a fun what if. But I actually do think he's a nice compliment opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. And also NFL ready run defender. Like off the rip, I think this guy becomes a 3-down potential dude because of what he can do against the run, which makes it that much easier to draft him in the first round. Kansas City Chiefs, this is going to be where we start picking up the pace because we get into round 2. Ariante Ursary. If you watch the Chiefs this year, you don't often sign veterans off the street, once, get into November, December. But when DJ Humphries, when he's healthy and the Chiefs are like sprinting to get on the phone with his agent, that says a lot about that position, doesn't it? So left tackle, definitely a spot I think they should pour more assets into. It's with the Chiefs, there's like 2 spots where I'm like, what could potentially cost them a year? Other than a Patrick Mahomes injury, obviously. It's, just absolutely disastrous injuries at 2 spots, the offensive line and the secondary. And we've actually seen a little bit of both this year, but I just think, if that left tackle spot goes sideways, then this team definitely has a lot of question marks ahead of them. So, don't be afraid to continue to pour assets into that spot. Draft Ariante Ursary. Hopefully he's that, fix at left tackle. You get Joe Thuney back inside to guard. And then you let Wanya Morris and Kingsley Suamataia. Both guys have reps at right tackle. Let them figure out that right tackle spot. Let Jawan Taylor go. Use that money elsewhere on the roster. That's just how I would kind of play my cards here if I were the Chiefs. But some of it's also going to come down to the board, right? Like, I would draft Wyatt Milam or Ariante Ursary here for the Chiefs, but both those guys are gone. Are they looking to do this? So the board definitely plays a big factor as well. All right, on to the second round. New York Giants, how ideal is this? I like Ayo Manor falls into your lap. Now you got that big body, prototypical X to play as a complement to Malik Neighbors, and we drafted Cam Ward number 1 overall. So just trying to revamp, overhaul that very, very hard to watch Giants offense as of this moment. To the New England Patriots, we just talked about him. Princely Uman-Mielen. He's one of my favorite pure pass rushers in this edge class, and it's a loaded defensive line this year's in the 2025 class that is. Uman-Mielen might have some question marks as to what he can do as a run defender. At 254 pounds, we'll see if that's the official and true weight that he plays at once we get to the combine. If that's the case, I think you can develop him into at least not being like a liability against the run. And if that's the case, love the first step, love the bend, wide arsenal of moves he can go to as well. So I think from a pass rush standpoint, this guy's pretty much NFL ready to go. And minimum, this is your Josh Uche replacement, right? Uche traded the deadline. Uman-Mielen, minimum, he replaces that. All right, to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Safety plays just got to get better. And this is also a team that I just feels like they're always losing the turnover battle. That's just kind of a gut feeling from when I watch the Jags on Sundays, right? But Xavier Watts can change that picture. He still struggles as a tackler, but the over-the-top playmaking, true free safety ability is there. And we'll see if Ryan Nielsen's back as a DC. But I think about Nielsen a year ago with Atlanta and the impact he had with Jesse Bates in the middle of that defense. It's high praise to give Xavier Watts, but he could have that type of takeaway potential that makes everything else that much easier for Ryan Nielsen. And it just hasn't worked out with Andre Sisco and some of the other guys there in that safety room, unfortunately. So time to pour some assets into that position. Tennessee Titans going to get a new name into one of my mocks. I'm going to go with Armand Membu, the right tackle from Missouri. He's a little bit squattier, right, like 6'3", but from what I hear, the arm length is going to check out just fine. And Nicholas Petit-Frere is just not cutting it right now for the Tennessee Titans. So draft and immediately start a right tackle from the SEC that keeps J.C. Latham over at left tackle. You can continue to build upon the progress you've made over the course of this year, and hopefully you have your book in tackle situation figured out for whoever that quarterback is next year in Nashville. Cleveland Browns here at 37. We could have gone Ashton Jeanty in the first round. Absolutely would that have been awesome. Yes, it's a lot of fun. But instead you get Kelvin Banks Jr., which also just want to shout out PFF for putting in the year picks there. That is like godsend. I'm so happy they finally did that. But you could also get Kelvin Banks Jr. and Amarian Hampton, who's my RB2, and just like as downhill runner as downhill running gets, right? Like when this guy hits his top speed, he's not slow by any stretch either, but he's just that great between the tackles power runner. And I think, Jerome Ford brings that long speed, a little bit more wiggle, make a guy miss in the phone booth than Hampton has. So they really serve as a nice 1-2 punch off of each other. And I just think, fix the offensive line and then put Amarian Hampton behind that group and have some fun there if you're a Browns fan. Actually, sticking with the running back spot, Caleb Johnson's going to be the pick here for the Raiders. Sincere McCormick's a nice story, but I don't think that's a long-term starter there. And even if he is like a piece in it, it's running back by committee pretty much across the board in the NFL. So get another guy in that mix. McCormick plus Johnson, I think that's a lot better of a running back room than what they went into this season with, I'll just say the least. Back-to-back picks from the Bears coming off their loss on Thursday, and we are going to go double down on the defensive line. I'm going to have first pick be Landon Jackson, but you could have done this in either order. But Landon Jackson, 6'7", 280, long arms. This is that, we'll see what happens with the DC, but like Montez Sweat, kind of 4'3" DN prototype. Landon Jackson kind of fits that same mold, which again kind of ties back to Matt Eberflus, who's obviously no longer there. But I do think that number 2 edge spot is something that you just got to get better at. And I do think Landon Jackson, minimum, going to be a solid run defender with his size, power, and length. And then you're hoping to get more out of him as a pass rusher at the next level. And then here at pick 40, I was between Tyleik Williams and TJ Sanders. Ultimately, I think there's just a little bit more juice in TJ Sanders' game. I could totally understand Tyleik Williams. Williams, to me, is just going to be a high-level run defender, space eater. TJ Sanders could be a good run defender, but also I think there's more, juice, more explosion in that step. And that first step, that could potentially turn him into a better, more lethal pass rusher too. So, and again, coming back to Eberflus, this kind of feels like the 3-tech they wanted Gervon Dexter to be, that 3-tech that is pivotal to an Eberflus defense. He's obviously gone, so we'll see how that defense changes and what the scheme ultimately becomes. Maybe once we find out who that DC is, I will lean towards Tyleik Williams. Either one of those guys certainly in play for me here for the Bears. And where I have Tyleik Williams going, I'd be more than comfortable with TJ Sanders going to that spot as well. Anyways, moving on, New York Jets, we're going to get a developmental tackle here in Josh Connerly. I just think, that right tackle spot's going to be something that you have to look at sooner rather than later. And, Jonas Savaiinaea, we'll talk about him later. I think he's a guard. Charles Grant, you could go there, but even that, I don't really want to start him right away. Flip him over the other side. And Bo's probably an interior offensive lineman. Donovan Jackson's absolutely a guard. So I'm going to go Josh Connerly Jr., and we'll just kind of cross-train him to be able to flip over to the right side. Olu Fashanu will be our left tackle of the future. And ultimately what I think makes this all work is just get Morgan Moses back on a 1-year deal, let him play right tackle, and let Josh Connerly sit and learn behind a long-time, very successful NFL veteran in Morgan Moses Jr. Or Morgan Moses, I don't think there's a junior in there. But I think that's ultimately kind of the game plan I had in mind here for the Jets. Get Morgan Moses back, and then let Connerly kind of learn from him, and then you have your left tackles, or your tackle tandem of the future with Olu at left and Josh Connerly on the right side. To the New Orleans Saints, this was a really easy one. Holes across that interior offensive line really right now, especially with the amount of injuries they've had. But Tyler Booker, plug and play that guy at left guard, and it's not a sexy pick, but it's eating your vegetables. And this team, no matter what they decide to do at quarterback, head coach, a lot of variables still to be figured out for the Saints this upcoming offseason. But whoever steps in that spot has got to look at that O-line and do some overhauling for sure. Like Talise Fuwanga, like the trajectory of that pick. But that interior offensive line needs some help, and I think Tyler Booker's a step in the right direction. To the 49ers, we'll see what happens with Charvarius Ward if they bring him back. Corner's not nearly as big of a need to me. But in the event that he's gone, I really like the size, athleticism, and of course the background for Darian Porter. Former receiver turned corner. He's 6'4". The ball skills are there. Like his feel and zone coverage. And this has typically been, a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 4. Really ever since, D'Amico Ryans was there. Before that, Saleh was after that. But this has been a team that's been a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 4 over the last, half decade to a decade. So, Renardo Green, man coverage, background, that's definitely his strength. But, maybe that was just kind of a signal to what they want to do more of. But that's going to be interesting to see. I do think Porter has a lot of traits that could be more man coverage specialist, kind of like Reek Woolen in Seattle. But I think right now, probably the zone stuff is more interesting to me just because of the natural ball skills that are there. But either way you spin it, Lenore, Porter, Renardo Green, that's a nice little building block foundation at the corner spot if they do lose Charvarius Ward in free agency. Miami Dolphins, like I said, Jonas Savaiinaea is, to me, probably going to be a guard. We'll see what the arm length is. But, man, this fit in Miami would be a lot of fun. And this is definitely like this landing spot, kick him inside to play right guard. The movement skills are definitely there, and he's got plenty of anchor in that lower half to kind of sit and anchor against pass rushers if they're trying to win with power. So, yeah, I like this fit a ton. And it's you get into this interior offensive line class, and there's not always a perfect fit here at 44, but this one kind of worked out with the way the board fell. Move him inside. He's got great movement skills to fit with what Mike McDaniel wants to do, but I also think he's a boon to this team in regards to pass protection for Tua and company. Let's get on to the Indianapolis Colts here at 45. I'm going to go Kevin Winston Jr. I know he was, he's out all of this year for Penn State, but I still really like the player. I see a lot of Jaquan Brisker in his game. Flexibility to play over the top, play in the box, sure tackler, hard hitter, good range and coverage. So kind of a jack of all trades, can do a little bit of everything. And I really like the idea of that with Blackman hitting free agency for the Colts. I still have hope for Nick Cross as kind of an over-the-top free safety type, but whatever ends up happening there at safety for the Colts, like Kevin Winston Jr. has a way to kind of fit into the picture with his versatility. To the Cincinnati Bengals, this is the Tyleik Williams pick. Duh. For the Bengals, it felt like a lot of mocks, especially like first 2 weeks of the year, you had to go IDL for the Bengals just because that run defense was putrid to begin the year. It's gotten a little bit better, but it's still definitely a sore spot for that defense, which the defense in general has been a sore spot. I think Tyreek Williams goes a long way to plugging up that middle. Plus, it's another one of these fun, like, Ohio State guy with a Michigan guy, Chris Jenkins Jr. plus Tyreek Williams. It's kind of a fun rivalry. But more seriously, two of the best run defenders at the ideal spot in each of the last two drafts. So it's actually makes a lot of sense there, as we have a guest picker here coming up behind me with Bear sitting down now. But anyways, let's get on to the Dallas Cowboys here at 47. This is where I'm going to have Isaiah Bond come off the board. I like the upside that comes with Isaiah Bond, right? Like, there's just not a whole lot of guys that are that explosive, that shifty, and kind of off that agile. But the route consistency is definitely, waning, from play to play. But man, I still kind of buy into the upside there. If you can get him bought in, play in and play out, I think there's something special there, potentially with Isaiah Bond. And with Brandon Cooks getting up there in age, this kind of naturally makes sense to, pass the torch from Cooks to Bond there in that receiver room in Dallas. Next up, Arizona Cardinals. Going to go back to that tackle tandem in Arizona. I'm going to go with Ajanai Cornelius. Him and Connolly both probably need a year to add about 10 pounds to their frame. They're both a little bit smaller than I would like, but I love the movement skills, love their feet, and overall I think the hand placement's pretty solid as well. Maybe a little bit more so with Connolly than Cornelius, but again, I think there's building blocks for both of those guys. Really pretty solid. I'm a pretty big fan of both those guys. And here for the Cardinals, like, I don't love Jonah Williams, but if he's like a 1 year stopgap, you build up Cornelius, get him 10 pounds into that frame from year 1 to year 2. I think there's a plan in place there to pass the torch down to Cornelius as he goes into year 2, and he could be your potential right tackle of the future, which is where he plays right now for Oregon. And then boom, Paris Johnson Jr., Ajanai Cornelius, there's your tackle tandem of the future in Arizona. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I'm going to go Jahad Campbell, right? Levante David can't do it forever. I think that other off-ball linebacker spot's been a bit of an issue this year for Tampa Bay, so this one makes sense. He could play alongside David, hopefully for 1 year, but then I could also see a world where hopefully get one more year of Levante David. He's just a fun player to watch for me, selfishly. Let's get one more year of Levante David, please. And then, ideally, when David retires, Campbell's there, ready to go to take over the mantle and be that, kind of face of the middle of the defense. I certainly think he's got that skill set. He's a really nice, fluid player in coverage, solid against the run, can pass rush as well, a little bit of everything in his game. Let's get on to Seattle here at 50. I don't often mock tight end to the Seattle Seahawks, but I felt like, hey, Mason Taylor actually is kind of an interesting fit. 6'5", 255, more than comfortable as a blocker, just a really fluid mover, good understanding how to sit in soft spots against zone, which then, off of that, his man coverage beating ability is there because of his frame and his athleticism and just how, again, fluid he is. So, yeah, just George Fant I think the time has come. Let's move on from George Fant there in Seattle, and I think Mason Taylor would be a pretty sizable upgrade in regards to pass catching. And also, like, keep your eye on Tyler Lockett. I could see this being the offseason where they move on from Lockett. If they keep DK, if they keep JSN, but move on from Lockett, Mason Taylor could kind of eat in some of those targets lost if Lockett's gone. But, things to be figured out. There's, of course, going to be continuous DK Metcalf trade rumors, too. So, time will tell what goes on there and those pass catchers in Seattle. All right, to the Atlanta Falcons here at 51. I've been kind of enamored with them going corner. I wanted to change it up a little bit. I'm going to go Sebastian Castro here and basically get them a nickel corner. I think he's a really nice player when it comes to playing at the line of scrimmage, playing in the box. He's a more than willing tackler. He's a physical player at his size as well. Maybe the coverage took a bit of a step back this year, but also coverage is so variable year to year. You can go from elite to pretty good the next year, and that's still technically a step down. So I like the player Sebastian Castro. May not be a first round guy for me like some of the slots of the last few years, but I think a rock solid player, helps shore up that run defense, which has been a little come and go sometimes for the Falcons. But I also think his coverage ability, what could be there on the high end, plus AJ Terrell on the outside, that becomes a really fun secondary. And Jesse Bates, of course, still there in Atlanta. That becomes a really fun secondary to watch. Then we get to the Houston Texans here at 52. Deion Walker didn't have quite the elite year that maybe we wanted and could have had to get him in that top half the first round. That being said, the man's almost 370 pounds, and if he can do what he said before the season and run like a high 4.6, low 4.7s 40, there's gonna be people out there that say, whoa, someone that big, that athletic, got to find a way to get that guy on the roster. And if that's the case, who better to coach him up than D'Amico Ryans, right? Like, we've seen a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball all of a sudden have career years, right? And take huge steps forward because D'Amico Ryans knows how to coach that side of the ball. And he's just a great leader in general, and hopefully they figure out the offense, because I think that in turn would make this defense a whole lot better as well. So Deion Walker is that, kind of interior space eater, high-level run defender. That's awesome. I think you'll get that pretty much right away. But there's a lot of meat on the bone there for him as a pass rusher, especially if he's as athletic as he advertised before the season. Time will tell there. But if he is, I would love to see D'Amico Ryans try to work his magic and get that true interior disruptor that Texans just don't have right now. All right, on to the the Los Angeles Chargers, two very different teams. But this is where I'm going to have Donovan Jackson go. I think he could be that left guard of the future, and then you move Zion Johnson back over to the right side. I hate that they have Donovan Jackson in here as a left tackle. The only reason he's playing left tackle right now is because Josh Simmons got hurt. This guy's a guard. Don't watch the tackle tape. It's not pretty. It's not great. It's definitely not his best tape. Watch him at guard. Former 5-star recruit. Love the athleticism. Love the movement skills. And I think there's plenty of power there. So you draft Donovan Jackson. You play him at left guard. Flip Zion Johnson over to the right side. This is a team that wants to win on the ground. I think this is a nice step to filling in some of the weak spots that they have there on the interior of that O-line. All right, next up, Denver Broncos. I'm going to go Jaden Higgins here. Again, this is a tough team for me to draft for because now that, Riley Moss is playing great, corner 2 used to be like the cheat code of my mocks. Like, oh, yeah, they could get a guy opposite of Pat Surtain. Well, now they got him. So, we gave him a tight end in round 1, and, I came back to, like, what are they going to do with Cortland Sutton? Feels like there's always trade rumors. He's been really good, but is he kind of old? Too much money? He doesn't really feel like he makes that much money, but maybe is he, like, too old for where this team kind of fits? I don't know. I really don't know. Broncos fans, I'd be curious to hear what you think this team will do at the receiver spot. I'm phoning a friend for some help here. But in the event they do move on from Cortland Sutton, Jaden Higgins, 6'4", prototypical X, good jump ball skills, big frame, wide catch radius. A lot of things to like there is that kind of Cortland Sutton X receiver replacement. Then let's get on to the Carolina Panthers. This pick comes courtesy of the Los Angeles Rams. I'm going to go back to the D-line. Yes, I know we went edge earlier. There's definitely other spots in this roster that you could attack. Corner is certainly one of them. But I'm going to go Derek Harmon here just because, I think the first half this year was better for Harmon than the second half. And I think, it's tough. It's give and take sometimes. He goes from Michigan State to Oregon, drops 10 pounds, looks way more athletic, way more spry. Great. But he also feels like he gives up a little bit more in the run game now, too. So it's definitely a trade-off, but if he were to go to Carolina, if Derek Brown comes back to being 100%, that dude's as good a run defender there is at the interior defensive line spot. He is awesome at that, which kind of hides the weakness that I maybe have with Derek Harmon. Plus, Abdul Carter, a little bit lighter. So I feel like Derek Brown could kind of fill in the spot where I'm like, I'm a little iffy about Harmon. All of a sudden, that becomes a nice 1-2 punch. Then you throw in Abdul Carter, Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Wonnum in the mix. Now that defensive line looks really, really nice there in Carolina. Again, corner could have certainly been in play here. You could have gone on to the offensive side of the ball as well. I wouldn't have hated that. But I also think some of the receivers will be available in the third round. So if we had a third round, there's like a receiver specifically in mind for Miami that I'm kind of thinking of as an Adam Thielen replacement. But here, going to go down that defensive line once again. Harmon to partner up with Derek Brown on the interior, plus Abdul Carter from the first round. All right, Washington's next up here at 56. Going to do something a little different. I'm kind of curious where Commanders fans are at with this offensive line right now. We go Charles Grant. I always saw Coleman more as a guard, but he's held up. He's been fine at left tackle, and he may stick there. But I could also see a world where you could flip Charles Grant over to the right tackle spot, make do with Andrew Wiley for the time being, but ultimately kind of build up Charles Grant to be on that right side. He's going to be at the senior circuit. He's got a big, couple of months ahead of him in regards to this draft process. He kind of feels like he's everyone's small school favorite prospect right now, and he's got great tapes. He's certainly warranted that praise, but it's going to be interesting to see, I believe it's the Senior Bowl. I might be wrong. It might be the Shrine Bowl that he's going to, and that's going to be a step up in, weight class, so to speak, in regards to competition. And, of course, combine, all those athletic measurables, where are they at for Charles Grant? They're going to be a huge indicator there as well. But I do think specifically right tackle's a spot where the Commanders can get better. We'll see what they decide to do with Coleman long term, but, one or potentially two of those tackle spots could be upgraded there in Washington, depending on what they do with Coleman. All right, Pittsburgh Steelers back up here at 57. I was kind of between both TCU receivers. Something about Savion Williams' build kind of screams, oh, this might be the Russell Wilson type of guy, assuming they bring back Russ. But I'm going to go with Jack Beck. He's got really awesome size, 6'2", 215. I almost kind of see him as a guy who could be power slot at the next level or big body receiver on the outside, kind of comes with both. But sure-handed, he's got a few more deep contested catches this year than Savion Williams. More contested catches than Savion Williams as well. But both those guys are going to be the Senior Bowl, and I'm super pumped to be able to see them because that's going to be a huge week for both those guys because I don't think they're on everyone's radar. That could be the week where, all of a sudden Savion Williams is in the first round of every mock or like in the top 50 of every mock, and all of a sudden Jack Beck is sprinkled in these first round of these mocks post-Senior Bowl. So it's going to be a big week for them. Receiver 2 right now is just, Calvin Austin's made some nice strides. I think the ball tracking's a lot better. Van Jefferson's, a guy, but I definitely think that receiver 2 spot is something that Pittsburgh should look to upgrade. I'd also be totally comfortable with them actually using their third-round receiver from last year in Roman Wilson, someone that I liked a good bit, and someone else that was at the Senior Bowl last year. Anyways, leaving my Pittsburgh Steelers in the dust, let's go on to the division rival, the Baltimore Ravens, and let's give them Donovan Ezeraku. This would kill me as a Steelers fan, but Ezeraku is one of my favorite edge rushers to watch. Unique build, 6'2", 247, very long arms, good combination of being able to win with length, but also speed and bend. So he becomes a really interesting component to a defense that has an Odafe Owe, who's a solid player. David Ojabo just hasn't quite taken that next step forward in his progression. So, Kyle Van Noy, kind of a mercenary. Wouldn't be shocked if they bring him back. But I think one more guy in the mix there could take this defense to another level. And it's already a defense that's been improving week over week this season. Next up, Green Bay Packers back on the clock. I'm going to go with Azarai Thomas here. Florida State's become this nice little pipeline of man coverage specialist corners from Renardo Green and Jerry Jones last year. Azarai Thomas, I think similar types of strength as those guys. Prototypical build right around that 6 foot, 190 pound mark. So kind of checks both those boxes. And Eric Stokes, I think, is certainly a player they can upgrade on. Ty Alexander, apparently not playing the rest of the year for Green Bay. There's kind of been a continuous, does he like being there? Did the Packers want him there? What's the deal with Jair in Green Bay? I don't think he wants to be playing there. That being said, depending on if Jair's there or if he's not, 1 to 2 starting outside corner spots could be up for grabs for Green Bay going into next season. In an ideal world, you get Jair back, and then you're just looking to improve upon from Eric Stokes. All right, next up is the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to go with Ashton Gillotte, who has been awesome again this year. He's kind of been lost in the mix, it feels like, but 6'3", 275 pounds. I think the arm length is going to check out. You hear 6'3", 275, and you're like, oh, it's kind of squatty. But I think the arm length can be just fine. You don't see it on his tape where he's not at the point of contact, right? He's not initiating contact with his arms. He's there. It doesn't feel like his arms are short whatsoever, and he just plays with a ton of power. So I'm really looking at this as this is your Brandon Graham replacement right here on that defensive line as he continues to get up there in age. A couple of picks here for the Buffalo Bills. I'm going to go with Maxwell Hairston, corner from Kentucky. Really nice eyes. I just really like his comfortability playing in zone coverage. Buffalo primarily a zone-heavy defense. I just think Maxwell Hairston, this could be your Rasul Douglas replacement depending on what happens with him and free agency this offseason. But if not him, somewhere in the mix, I think his ball skills and zone coverage feel will get him on the field sooner rather than later for Buffalo. And then I want to go to the linebacker spot. Matt Milano, I think his play will get better as he continues to return from injury. But some of the other guys have been a little bit of a concern. Terrell Bernard wasn't as good this year as he was last year. So just throwing another linebacker in the mix, and I want to get a different name in here in these mocks that I haven't talked about yet. Chris Paul Jr., I think really solid player, good sideline to sideline speed, good coverage feel, like the change of direction off of that. The knock is he's 6'1", 235, and what does that look like against the run, right? But more often than not, that's just kind of the way linebackers are being built nowadays, right? Smaller, yes, a little bit lighter, going to give up more against the run, but they're freak athletes, and if they're going to make a tackle for loss, it's going to be with their quick shooting gaps versus old school Andy Katzenmeyer types who were just big beefy dudes who could hold their own at the point of attack. So it's just a different path of getting there, but it's just kind of the new age linebacker build nowadays. All right, 2 more picks. I'm going to give the Detroit Lions Marcus Embo. Again, I think of him more as an interior offensive lineman. I know Jordan Reed of ESPN kind of sees him as a center. I'm just going to say guard right here, but if he does have center flexibility, that's also interesting as Frank Ragnow continues to battle injuries and he continues to get up there in age. But Christian Mahogany, I think, is going to be one of those starting guards of the future. I think Embo could be the other as they continue to get older and older at those 3 interior offensive line spots. And then if Jordan Reed's right and Embo, ultimately his best position is center, that also works out really, really well for the Detroit Lions. Then we get to the Kansas City Chiefs. Last pick to talk about here. I'm going to go with Zy Alexander. Just kind of an interesting corner prospect that I haven't talked about a whole lot in the past, but 6'2", 194. I also liked the instincts and coverage there, and I think he's just got the frame and the build that typically, Steve Spagnuolo has wanted out of his corners. So I do think, with some injuries there, we've started to see the depth be tested in that Kansas City secondary for guys other than, Trent McDuffie. So I wouldn't hate the idea of just getting one more guy in that mix. He kind of, again, has that prototypical build that Spags wants in his cornerbacks. So that does it for our updated 2-round mock draft. Guys, let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section, or let me hear your thoughts in the XDMs. Would love to hear your thoughts, what picks you liked, which ones you didn't like, and who your favorite team is. Of course, that will give me a lot of context and give me an idea of what you're talking about and maybe what you would have preferred to see your favorite team do. So let me hear those thoughts in the comments as well as in my DMs. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. Again, we're trying to build out this YouTube channel for 32 Beat Writers, so definitely help us do just that. Or if you're watching on X, again, give us a follow on X, like this, and of course, shoot me any questions that you potentially have. But that is going to do it for me. Hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is TJ. We are signing off.